Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
They always acted surprised, as if I'd somehow disappeared from the family group photo like a glitch in the camera or a trick of the light, as if every single year it was just some harmless oversight. "Oh no, Harper, we thought you were still at work," or "We didn't think you were coming this year," or my personal favorite, "We figured you wouldn't want to be in it anyway." And maybe the first time I bought it, maybe even the second or third time, I swallowed the lump in my throat and smiled politely, pretending it didn't sting like hell to see everyone gathered in matching sweaters, standing on Grandma's porch under the twinkling Christmas lights, arms around each other, captioned with something like, "Family is everything," while I sat in a half-empty apartment 3 states away, checking my phone like a teenager waiting for a text that never came. But this year, something shifted, maybe in them, maybe in me, and when I saw the photo already posted, already filtered and favorited and commented on, without so much as a text from anyone telling me they were even gathering, something inside me just unlatched. I wasn't angry, not in that explosive throw your phone against the wall kind of way. It was colder than that, quieter. It was like someone had been dripping water on your forehead for years, and you'd finally just decided to move your head. Because here's the thing, I never needed to be center stage, never demanded the spotlight or begged for attention. I didn't wear low-cut tops to Thanksgiving or brag about my startup at Easter. I was never the problem, no matter what Aunt Tricia mumbled after her third glass of Pinot or how my mom's tone always went down a notch when someone asked about me. I did everything right. I got the grades, I got the degrees, I got the job. Hell, I got the accolades, actual headlines, actual press. When Forbes emailed me to say I'd made the 30 under 30 list, I sat in silence for a full minute, staring at the screen, not because I was shocked. I'd worked for it, I'd earned it, but because I instantly knew what was going to happen next. Nothing. My parents wouldn't call. My brother Jace might send a thumbs-up emoji if I texted him the link. Grandma would still ask me during our biannual phone call if I was still doing that online computer thing. And that was the truth of it. The ugly, quiet truth that festers underneath the polite family dynamics people like to post about. I was an accessory to them, a name they occasionally dropped at church when someone asked about that daughter of yours. A footnote in the family Christmas letter if I was lucky. And if I wasn't, I simply didn't exist. They didn't hate me, they ignored me. And let me tell you something, I'm not sure which one cuts deeper. This year, I didn't even know there was a gathering. No email, no text, no invitation lost in the mail. They just did it. They gathered, took the picture, smiled with their mouths but not their eyes, and posted it with a generic caption like, "Home for the holidays," while I sat alone in San Francisco, eating lukewarm pad thai from a takeout box and watching the photo blow up on social media, tagged and reshared and hearted by cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. And when I zoomed in, just to make sure, just to give them one last benefit of the doubt, I saw my own college roommate in the background, holding a plate of stuffing, laughing with Jace, looking perfectly at ease, perfectly invited. That's when it hit me. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. I closed the app. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even finish the pad thai. I stood up, walked to the window of my apartment, the one that looked out over Market Street, and the string of holiday lights someone had strung between buildings like hope stretched too thin, and I made a decision. It wasn't a dramatic one. It didn't involve storming into Grandma's house or calling out my mom in the comment section or writing a long, tear-soaked Facebook post. It was much simpler. I opened my laptop, logged into my business account, and contacted an ad agency in my hometown. I knew exactly the corner I wanted, right across from Grandma's house, where the sunlight hits around 10 in the morning, just as she's opening her kitchen curtains. The same spot they passed every Sunday after church. The billboard would run for 2 weeks. I sent them the photo Forbes had used, me in a navy suit with that sharp, clean grin that said, "I don't need your approval." I told them to write one line underneath, just one. Forbes 30 under 30, still not invited. I sent the payment in full, no hesitation, no refunds. That night, I turned off my phone, pulled a blanket around my shoulders, and sat in silence as the city buzzed around me. I knew what I'd done. I knew what they'd feel. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous, like maybe I wasn't the one left out, but the one who stepped out. And they were about to notice, all of them. There's something strange that happens when silence becomes a choice instead of a punishment. When the cold space they've always left you in stops feeling like exile and starts feeling like a weapon. I didn't text anyone that night. I didn't leave a dramatic voicemail or email my mom with a link to the family photo asking what the hell happened. I didn't even respond to the passive-aggressive "hope you're doing okay" message from Aunt Tricia, which, in hindsight, probably wasn't even meant to reach me, but was instead just a form of digital performance, a staged concern to ease her conscience. No, I said nothing, and saying nothing in that moment felt louder than anything I could have screamed. Because the truth is, I had spent my entire life trying to be noticed by people who were determined to look past me. And this year, I wasn't going to beg. I was going to watch. I landed in Indianapolis on a quiet morning 2 days after Christmas, and nobody knew I was there. Not my mom, not my brother, not even Jace's girlfriend Rachel, who used to be my roommate before she somehow melted into the family without so much as a raised eyebrow. I didn't even tell my old high school friends or the 2 cousins I still occasionally texted when something truly catastrophic happened. I just grabbed my carry-on, rented a car under my assistant's name, one of the perks of owning your own damn company, and drove through the gray suburbs, past the familiar chain restaurants, the iced-over strip malls, the painfully nostalgic gas stations with the same broken pumps we used to hang around during summer breaks. The sky was thick with that particular kind of Midwestern winter, a sunless, colorless weight pressing down on everything like it too, had given up trying to be cheerful. And then I saw it, the corner lot across from Grandma's house. It was the perfect location, elevated just enough to loom, just enough to cast a shadow over the little brick bungalow with the red shutters and the eternal scent of baked ham and judgment. I parked across the street and sat for a long time, watching the curtains twitch like nervous fingers. I knew she was in there. She always was. Grandma never missed her morning surveillance, as we used to call it, her habit of sipping weak coffee while inspecting the neighborhood like a retired detective who couldn't let go of the case. I imagined her in her robe, peering out from behind the sheer curtains, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Because the billboard wasn't subtle, it wasn't loud either. It didn't need to be. It was clinical, elegant, undeniable. My face, my name, my Forbes badge. And beneath it, the question that I was sure would twist into the ribs of every single person in that house. Forbes 30 under 30. Still not invited? I watched the first reaction play out like a silent film. Grandma's head vanished from the curtain. 5 minutes later, she was back, this time with Aunt Tricia, pointing, gesturing, looking around as if the offender might still be standing nearby, with a bucket of paint and a rebellious grin. And then the trickle began. Cars started pulling up one by one, like summoned spirits who had sensed something was wrong in the spiritual realm of family image. My Uncle Brad, Cousin Emily, even my dad, who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but in the middle of a domestic inconvenience. They all stood on the porch or on the front lawn, faces tilted upward, staring at that billboard like it was a damn burning bush. And the best part? No one had the faintest clue where I was. They didn't know if I was in town. They didn't know if I was watching. They didn't even know if it was really me who put it up, though based on the chaos blooming in their body language, it was clear they all assumed it, the smart ones, anyway. I cracked the window a little, just enough to hear the muffled cluster of arguments bubbling across the street. Tricia was gesturing furiously with her phone, and I could almost lip-read her accusing someone, probably my mother, of not checking her email or ignoring another message, because that's what this family does. When they can't disprove your pain, they dissect the logistics of it instead, trying to shrink it down to a clerical error, an email filter, a miscommunication that absolves everyone of guilt. But this wasn't that kind of mistake. And they knew it. Then Jace showed up. He pulled up in his usual understated gray SUV, the kind of car that says, "I'm successful but modest," which was exactly his brand. I watched as he stood still, separate from the group, staring at the billboard for a long, long time. He didn't talk. He didn't text. He didn't even look confused. Just quiet. And then, after about 10 minutes, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, half expecting a barrage of angry question marks or a long-winded guilt trip. But all it said was, "Is this your way of saying you're finally coming home?" I didn't reply, not because I didn't want to, not because I wanted to drag it out, but because I needed to know what he meant. Was he mocking me? Was this some kind of veiled accusation, one of those condescending, "you've changed" jabs that people like to throw at women who dare to outgrow their small-town roots? Or was it something else entirely? Was it a flicker of real curiosity, of confusion, of realization that maybe, just maybe, something had gone wrong that he hadn't noticed until it was screaming at him from 30 feet in the air? I put the phone down and kept watching. The gathering dispersed slowly, like a party that no one had wanted to attend in the first place. But the damage was done. The seed had been planted. Every car that drove down that street for the next 2 weeks would see that message. Every neighbor, every mailman, every churchgoer, every childhood friend who still lived in town. They would all see it, and they would all wonder. And as for me, I wasn't done yet, because the billboard wasn't revenge. It was an opening move. A very public, very deliberate chess piece. And I was just getting started. There's a peculiar kind of satisfaction that comes from watching a group of people react to their own reflection when they've spent years pretending the mirror wasn't even there. That morning, sitting in a borrowed rental car with the engine off and the windows cracked just enough to catch the sound of muffled voices and shifting tensions, I felt none of the guilt I assumed I might. None of that gnawing self-doubt or residual ache that usually creeps in when you decide to finally stop playing the role of the forgiving daughter and start acting like someone with spine, someone with a memory, someone who refuses to be erased. Instead, I watched the chaos unfold like a scene I hadn't just written but produced. And for once in my life, I wasn't on the sidelines hoping for approval. I was in control of the story they kept trying to rewrite without me. The billboard had done more than stir the pot. It had tipped the damn thing over. What had started as a quiet morning in the Lane household, complete with Grandma's usual ritual of porch coffee and moral judgment, had evolved into a full-blown suburban PR crisis, complete with hushed arguments on the driveway, frantic phone calls made while pacing in socks, and several long, squinting stares directed at the unmissable image of my face, smiling down from 30 feet of strategic placement. But what really sealed it, what told me this wasn't just a momentary stir, but something that had landed, was the arrival of Rachel. Rachel, with her perfect bone structure and that Instagrammable ease she carried into every room like a well-rehearsed pose, was the last person I expected to show up here. She wasn't blood, wasn't technically even family, not yet anyway. But somehow, over the last few years, she'd become more one of them than I ever had. She slipped into their lives like warm water poured into a glass. No splash, no sound, no trace of disruption. I watched as she stepped out of Jace's car, looked up at the billboard, and tilted her head just slightly, the way she used to do in college whenever she was preparing to say something cruel, in a voice that sounded like concern. And for a split second, I wondered if she'd seen it coming, if she knew on some level that I'd eventually stop absorbing the slight and start reflecting it back with interest. Then came the texts. At first, it was just a trickle, 1 or 2 cautious messages from numbers I hadn't saved in years, former cousins by marriage or old family friends who still had me buried in some group thread. They were vague, hesitant, almost performative. "Hope you're doing okay. And crazy times, huh?" And my personal favorite, "Did you mean to put that up?" As if billboards were things that accidentally appeared. As if I might have sneezed mid-click and launched a full-scale visual takedown without realizing. I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I didn't have words, believe me, I had plenty, but because I'd already spoken. I'd already said everything I needed to, and I'd said it in bold white letters tall enough for the entire neighborhood to read on their way to New Walgreens. Then finally, Jace. He didn't text this time. He called. And against every instinct I'd built up over the years, the ones telling me to ignore, to disengage, to not give them the satisfaction of knowing I was even watching, I answered. Not because I wanted a reconciliation, and certainly not because I owed him anything, but because if anyone in that family still had a fraction of a soul left, I needed to know if it was him. He didn't start with small talk. No, how have you been, or where are you, not even a passive-aggressive sigh. Just 4 words, quiet and cautious, and not nearly as angry as I expected. Are you in town? I paused for a long second, long enough for the silence to start stretching between us like a rubber band, ready to snap. Yes, I said finally, but not for long. Another pause, then a different question, heavier this time. Why now? And for the first time in years, I told him the truth. Not the polished version, not the emotionally diluted family-friendly summary, but the actual ugly truth that I'd been stitching together like a patchwork blanket every year they left me out. Every time they cropped me from the picture, every time they made me feel like a ghost at my own family's table. Because I've spent 6 years pretending I believe their excuses, I said, and my voice didn't shake. Because every time they accidentally left me out, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Because I thought maybe it was my fault for moving away, for building something on my own, for not coming home with a fiancé or a baby or a casserole. But this year they didn't even lie. They just didn't tell me. And that silence, that wasn't an accident. It was a message, so I sent one back. He didn't respond right away. I imagined him standing in the garage or the laundry room, the only places in that house where anyone ever got real privacy, running a hand through his hair the way he used to when he was trying to understand something too big to name. Then he said something that nearly stopped my breath. They said you stopped showing up on purpose, said you didn't want to be included anymore. I blinked, staring out the windshield at the house across the street, where silhouettes still hovered behind curtains like shadows in a play. I RSVP'd every year, Jace, I said, and now my voice did crack, not with weakness but with the pure, stunned clarity of betrayal. I emailed, I texted, I even sent Christmas cards. You think I wanted to be the one person missing every year? He didn't argue, he just exhaled. And then quietly, I didn't know. And maybe he didn't. Maybe he was as much a pawn in all of this as I had been. But the bigger question, the one that was starting to form like a dark cloud at the edge of my thoughts, wasn't about him at all. It was about who had made the decision to erase me and why. That evening, after the street quieted and the porch lights dimmed, I opened my laptop, pulled up my email archives, and started scrolling. Every RSVP, every holiday message, every confirmation sent to my mother's email address, all of them marked red. Every single one. I stared at the timestamps, each like a tiny betrayal. Each one proof that someone had seen me reaching out and chosen not to answer. Not only had I not disappeared, they had seen me, heard me, and decided I didn't belong. And that realization, that changed everything. The next morning, I met Jace at the kind of diner that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the Reagan administration. The kind of place where the waitresses still called you hun, and the coffee tasted like regret but came with unlimited refills, which somehow made it worth it. I chose it deliberately, not for the food, not for the comfort, but because it was neutral ground, halfway between nostalgia and anonymity, a space where the weight of family history couldn't sneak in through the walls like it did in Grandma's kitchen or my parents' overly coordinated living room, where even the throw pillows seemed designed to suppress emotion. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in the booth by the window with his hands wrapped around a chipped mug, his eyes flicking up toward me with a mixture of hesitation, calculation, and something dangerously close to remorse. He looked tired, not in the way people look after a long week, but in the way people look when they finally started to put pieces together they've spent years pretending didn't fit. I slid into the booth across from him, ordered nothing, and waited. For once in our lives, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. I wanted him to speak first, to decide whether he was here to defend them or to finally, just once, acknowledge the rot that had been growing under our family's polished surface for years. Jace didn't waste time pretending he didn't know what I'd discovered. He didn't insult me with platitudes about miscommunication or shrug it off as the kind of family drama that everyone experiences but no one really means. He went straight for it, eyes steady, voice low. "They didn't want to include you," he said. And just like that, the air between us shifted. I leaned back, folding my arms, not out of defiance, but as a reflex, the way you brace yourself for impact after the wreck has already begun. I didn't interrupt. I didn't nod. I just let him continue, because deep down, I already knew. I'd known for a long time. I just hadn't heard anyone say it out loud. He told me that after I moved to San Francisco and stopped coming back every single holiday, Dad had started calling my absence willful. That Grandma had taken my job title, Chief Product Officer at a fintech company she couldn't pronounce, as proof that I thought I was better than them. That my mother, instead of defending me, had let those interpretations stand because it was easier to play along than admit she didn't understand the life I'd built. They'd decided, somewhere along the way, that my distance was judgment, that my success was arrogance, and that my independence was rejection. And rather than confront me, rather than ask, with even the barest ounce of honesty, why I hadn't been around more, they'd simply rewritten the narrative. In their version, I had pulled away, I had stopped showing up, I had made them the victims of my ambition. "I think it made them uncomfortable," Jace said. And for the first time, he looked ashamed. "You were the first to actually make it out, like really out. Not just a new city or a bigger paycheck, but a whole different orbit. And they didn't know how to talk to you anymore." I stared at him, trying to decide whether to laugh or scream, because the idea that my family had chosen to exile me out of emotional laziness, out of sheer discomfort with the version of me they couldn't define or domesticate, wasn't just infuriating, it was pathetic. They hadn't tried to understand. They hadn't asked. They'd just decided I didn't belong anymore and moved on as if I'd died quietly in a plane crash. And they were still too polite to mention it. "You know I never stopped sending those emails, right?" I said finally. And my voice sounded strange to my own ears, tight, brittle, a rope stretched too far. "I RSVP'd every year. I asked what time dinner was, I sent gifts, I sent cards, and they just, pretended not to see them?" Jace nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if the truth was so embarrassing he couldn't bear to say it aloud again. "They saw them," he said. "I asked Mom last night. She said she thought you were just doing it out of obligation, that you didn't mean it." There it was, that casual dismissal, that selective interpretation of effort that turned every attempt I made into a meaningless gesture, every olive branch into a performance. They had taken my presence for granted and twisted my absence into a choice. And somewhere in the middle of all that, they had decided that cutting me out of the photos, the plans, and eventually the will itself wasn't cruelty. It was just easier. "What else did she say?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Jace hesitated, then exhaled slowly, like someone stepping into cold water. "She said Grandma told them not to include you in the family photo unless you came back for good. No more in and out, no more short visits. She said either you commit to being part of the family or you don't get to be in the picture." The absurdity of it hit me like a slap. The photo, as if that image, that orchestrated slice of holiday performance, was sacred, and my unwillingness to relocate my life, my career, myself for their comfort disqualified me from being acknowledged as part of the bloodline. "She said that?" I asked, stunned. "Like said it?" Jace nodded again, and I saw the flicker of regret in his face. Regret not just for my sake, but maybe for his own, for having been part of the machinery that kept this delusion running for so long. "She didn't want you halfway in," he said. Said it confused the younger cousins, made them ask questions. I almost laughed. "What questions?" Why their successful, unmarried, fully functioning cousin only existed in passing reference. Why her name was whispered like a cautionary tale instead of celebrated like a role model. Why someone who built her own life from scratch was treated like a scandal just because she stopped showing up to carve turkey next to people who barely looked her in the eye. I didn't ask to be included, I said quietly. I just wanted the lies to stop. Jace looked at me for a long time, and for once he didn't have an answer. When we stood to leave, I didn't hug him. I didn't make promises about keeping in touch. I just turned toward the door, but before I stepped out, I paused, glanced back, and said one last thing. Tell them I'll be renting the Billboard again next year, maybe even the whole block. Think of it as a new family tradition. But just as I reached for the door, Jace's voice stopped me cold. Harper, he said. And something about the way he said it, gentle, hesitant, unfinished, made me turn. He looked nervous now, not like someone who had delivered hard truths, but like someone who still had one card left in his hand, something he wasn't sure he should play. You should read Grandma's will, he said. I mean, really read it. And with that, he walked out. And suddenly, the question that had hovered at the edges of this whole thing, was I excluded because I left? Or was I pushed because someone needed me gone? Started to take a shape far more dangerous than I was ready for. And I wasn't done. Not yet. There's a strange kind of heaviness that settles over you when a puzzle you thought was made up of small, cruel coincidences begins to reveal itself as something calculated, deliberate, and far older than you imagined. A weight that doesn't sit on your shoulders so much as it wraps around your lungs and makes you question whether anything you believed about your own family was ever truly real, or just a script they all agreed to stick to, so no one had to face the discomfort of admitting what had always been broken. I didn't go home after that conversation with Jace, because home, as I'd come to learn, wasn't a place. It was an idea I'd clung to for too long, a lie they let me believe so they wouldn't have to explain why I never quite fit into the frame. Instead, I drove to the courthouse the next morning, fueled by a kind of hollow clarity that felt neither angry nor desperate, but simply surgical. I wasn't chasing closure anymore. I was chasing the truth. The process was faster than I expected. Small towns, despite their endless bureaucracy and passive-aggressive charm, still move quickly when you ask for things wrapped in death and legacy. I filled out a form, signed my name in that strange, looping way that only ever appears on legal documents, and within 20 minutes, I was holding a printed copy of my grandmother's will in my hands. 8 crisp pages that smelled faintly of toner and finality. I sat down in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs in the waiting area, the kind meant to discourage loitering or contemplation, and began to read. At first, it was exactly what I expected. Bequests to each of the grandchildren, specific heirlooms designated for cousins who'd always been closer to her heart, or at least closer to her dining table. A modest fund left to the church where she'd sung in the choir for 47 years, despite never carrying a tune that didn't sound like static on a car radio. I read past the sentimental fluff, past the legalese and hollow blessings, until I reached the part that made everything else fall into place, like bones resetting after a break. To my granddaughter, Harper Lane, it began, and for a moment I felt a flicker of recognition. Like maybe, after everything, she had left me something, a token of understanding, a sliver of apology. But then I read on. Previously designated as beneficiary, to the family property located at 415 Newberry Street, is hereby removed due to estrangement and lack of contact. Current address unknown, no longer considered part of primary inheritance structure. My stomach turned in that slow, sickening way that only happens when pain meets proof, when the suspicion you've carried for years becomes something you can underline in black ink. Estrangement, lack of contact, current address unknown. I stared at those words, reading them over and over again as if repetition would somehow dilute their finality. She had erased me, not accidentally, not bureaucratically, but with full intention, with deliberate phrasing designed to make sure that no one would question why my name wasn't on the list. She hadn't forgotten me. She deleted me. And the most absurd part? I'd never moved without updating my records, never changed my number, never failed to send a holiday card or a message or an invitation. The only thing I'd done, the only unforgivable sin I'd apparently committed, was to build a life that didn't orbit her approval. I had dared to exist outside of the gravitational pull of the Lane family myth, and for that I had been cast out, like some rogue planet too unpredictable for their meticulously curated solar system. The rest of the will blurred after that. The numbers didn't matter, the jewelry didn't matter. The antique clock collection that no one actually wanted didn't matter. What mattered, what burned, was the knowledge that they had sat in a room, read this document, and not a single one of them had thought to call me, not to question it, not to fight for me, not even to warn me. They had read that clause and accepted it like gospel, and maybe that was the worst betrayal of all. Not the legal exclusion, but the silence that followed it. I walked out of the courthouse with the will folded in my coat pocket. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I needed to feel its weight. I needed to remember, in case I ever started doubting myself again, that this wasn't all in my head, that the isolation hadn't been imagined or exaggerated, that I hadn't been overly sensitive or dramatic, that they had, in writing and in word, chosen to remove me. That evening, as the sun began to sink over the flat Indiana landscape, and the Christmas lights started flickering on like false promises across the neighborhood, I drove back to that billboard one last time. It stood there like a monument, bright, bold, and utterly unapologetic. I parked across the street, stepped out into the cold, and stared up at my own face, at that line that had started it all. Forbes 30 under 30. Still not invited. It felt almost quaint now, almost too polite, so I called the ad company, extended the run by another week, and added a second line. I didn't vanish. You erased me. They said they could update it overnight. I didn't wait around to see it go up. I didn't need to. I already knew how it would land, how it would slice through the brittle narrative they'd worked so hard to maintain. Let them panic. Let them spin. Let them host their quiet little damage control meetings in the living room while pretending the real problem was how tacky it all looked. I wouldn't be there to listen. Instead, I booked a red-eye back to San Francisco, sat by the window, and let the dark swallow the cornfields below. I didn't cry. I didn't replay the conversations in my head. I didn't write a long text to Jace, thanking him for trying or blaming him for knowing too little too late. I just sat with it, with the truth, with the loneliness, with the freedom. Because here's what they never tell you that about being erased. It's only devastating if you spend your life asking to be seen again. And I was done asking. The morning after I landed, I walked into my office, took a deep breath of recycled startup air, and did something I hadn't done in weeks. I smiled. Not because everything was healed, not because the wound didn't still sting, but because for the first time, the story wasn't theirs to tell anymore. It was mine. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. But there's one thing I still wonder sometimes. Late at night, when the city hums and the silence settles in like fog over the bay, one thought that won't quite let go. If they could cut me out so cleanly, how many others have they erased and pretended never existed? And what did they get so scared I might find out?